pass over to you, Craig.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, so this is very much early work, my first sort of explorations with AI. Um, and yeah, so I'm Craig. I was introduced to Smalltalk at University at UC Berkeley. Um, and then I've been at a few research labs since then. I was at Atari Games and Interval Research, IBM Watson Research, and Lam Research. Um, and yeah, I have been sort of exploring AI since last summer. And when Tim asked if I'd like to do a talk, I just thought I would talk about what I'd been hacking on recently, which was this. And I didn't know there were all these other talks that were going to be scheduled, but of course it's sort of inevitable. So not surprised. But hopefully what I'm showing will be a sort of different take on it, even though I'm not very far along yet. Um, so I'm interested in exploring how the fact that we are live coding can produce useful context for uh, large language models and perhaps other forms of AI, and be integrated into our uh, IDEs in a useful way, ideally in a way that helps us collaborate not only with the AI, but with our present and future selves and with other developers. So let's see, did everyone see the slide just now? Did anyone see it?
Yes.
Okay. So yeah, please jump in at any time with questions and comments, because both this work and this talk are very new, and I'm trying to develop them both. So yeah, please just jump in at any time. And as far as the future goes, you can follow new developments at my blog over here on the right side of the screen, thiscontext.com. Actually, everything on my screen now is running in two web browsers, one on the left where these slides are, and one on the right. I'm just going to sort of make reference to some other interesting websites that I came across in my exploration. And in this web browser on the left, I'm running Squeak.js, which is an implementation of the open Smalltalk virtual machine that Vanessa Freudenberg did, that can run Squeak, and Pharaoh and Cuis, but I'm running Squeak at the moment. And I'm showing these slides in a little integration I did with another JavaScript framework called Impress. And it's been really great. It's sort of a Prezi-like take on doing slides as a web app. And since Squeak.js is, just running in the browser in the same address space as everything else, and it has a bridge for making JavaScript objects look like Smalltalk objects and vice versa, it's very easy to integrate other JavaScript frameworks. So that's how I'm doing my slides here. So yeah, my basic idea that sort of emerged from this is that the mere act of using a tool creates context for tools which complement it, and for using those tools to collaborate. And sort of in keeping with the original Smalltalk ideas put forth by Dan Ingalls and crew way back in the Byte magazine articles, of taking a simple idea and applying it pervasively. I was trying to explore this by integrating a large language model everywhere we can type text. And we're already sort of used to having a tool which is usable everywhere we can type text, namely evaluating code or invoking do it. So I wondered, where would things lead if I tried to be able to evaluate not only code, but also English? So I'll get right into some demos. And the first one is just, showing a workspace. This is one rough edge to my talk. I'll be moving the slides window around a lot, I think, because most of these windows will be coming up the top. Move this down here. So, we're all used to, in this case, printing, evaluating a piece of Smalltalk code and printing the answer. Is this readable? Can people see what I just typed in that workspace?
Yes,
Yeah.
but if you make it bigger, that would be great.
Could make it bigger.
That's fine.
Yeah.
At any time, just let me know if things are too small.
Okay.
Yeah, because this is a web page, I can just make things bigger or smaller. So yeah, that's sort of a classic tool, simple tool in Smalltalk. But it would be nice, everywhere we can evaluate code, we could just evaluate English. And also get all the attendant integration with that. Like, if you're going to log changes for evaluating code, you'd also want to be able to, log that you've evaluated this English. So yeah, I'm trying to apply this simple idea, everywhere you can enter text and just see where it goes. So I'll pause here a little bit to, talk a little bit about what underlies that. So what I've done to do that is intercede with the normal error handling you would get if you try to evaluate this as a Smalltalk expression. You've got a lot of unbound things here, so the compiler is going to complain. So I've interceded with the, I've interceded with how the compiler handles errors to, toss this evaluation off to a large language model, see if it can make sense of it. And a good place to sort of stop things, just to look at them, is in this method, which I'll explain more in a bit. But basically, it's part of a network client that talks to the OpenAI API over as a REST conversation. So if we were to do this again, okay. There's GAF. So I'm just going to move to where this is. So normally you would just do this here in evaluate Q if fail in the compiler. But instead, if we an undeclared variable, I'm going to ask the model of the tool that was requesting this evaluation, in this case, a workspace, to handle that exception instead. So hopefully the point will come across without getting too far into the weeds of how this particular implementation of Smalltalk implements, workspaces. But I do want to just show you where the flow of control is going, give you a more concrete picture of what's going on. So in this version of Squeak Smalltalk, workspaces and a bunch of other things in which you can type text are instances of subclasses of string holder. So instead of just failing and opening up a dialogue, or how you might bind some of these things as elements in a Smalltalk expression, it will instead, try to let the Open AI API make sense of it. By creating an OpenAI REST client for what I'm calling a tool. And this workspace gets to decide what that tool is. So maybe I'll stop at point where the workspace answers what its tool is.
Quick comment, Craig. Can you hear me?
Sorry? Yeah.
Some of us are posting questions in the chat instead of
oh yeah, I need someone to
interrupting
help
me.
yeah. I need someone, if someone could let me know every time there's a question in the text chat, I'd really appreciate that. Maybe Tim.
Yeah, sorry about that.
I'm back, or anyone, yeah.
I'm back at the desk now, so.
Oh, okay. Sorry, what was the question?
I think someone was asking about, rather than overriding an error handling, why not have a chat it or do it, or some sort of extra option, I think.
Oh yeah, that's another way of doing it. I was trying to make something extremely pervasive. This will work no matter if this is a workspace that's the requester model, or if it's an inspector or a debugger. And yeah, it'd probably be something more refined, but in this exploratory phase of using this, I wanted to just cut into a place where I know that I know will catch every attempt to do it or print it or inspect it in a simple way. But yeah, that's true. There are other ways this could be done. This could have been done maybe more elegantly, and maybe I will at some point. But for this initial experiment, I just wanted to cut into a very central choke point that I knew would catch all the use cases I wanted to explore here at the beginning. Okay, so if you can suspend your disbelief to play along with that, then we get into, how do we interact with the OpenAI REST client? In particular, what does that REST client want from this tool in order to do something meaningful? So what I do first is just make sure that it can answer that question. For now, and also this is also quick and dirty. If anything goes wrong with asking for that, I just go back to what it would have done before. Open a dialog asking you what you want to do with this error, assuming that it is Smalltalk code. But assuming it does know how to do that, then we get to this place I was trying to stop before, where we can create that client using that tool and add a user message for this conversation. And here we start to get into the OpenAI API of what you need to have a conversation. And generally what you use are system prompts, which set some expectations in the conversation you're having with the language model that are out of band from the main conversation that you see. And then user messages, which are the things you normally see in band in a conversation, like if you've used the ChatGPT chatbot. User messages would be the things that you actually type that you see in the user interface of the chatbot. And I guess I also won't get too go into too much detail about the particulars of the OpenAI API. But I will say that it seems to me that the APIs of all of the large language model providers are sort of converging onto the API that OpenAI has established. I'm just curious, is there anyone else here who's done some programming with any of the LLM APIs, like from OpenAI or Anthropic or whomever?
I have.
Yes, I have
Yeah.
as well.
Yeah, okay.
I tried Yan AI, which is something where you can run the language models locally. That means you do not have another, let's say, an external one, and you can download it for different platforms. Yan AI, and the nice thing is you can run it locally, either and in fact via a DLL in Windows, for instance, via shared library, or you can have a REST service there as well and call it. So you can totally run independent from any internet or other with your own AI. And you can download the language models from Hugging Face. It's really cool. You should try it.
Yeah, exactly. I've done some other work here, not only with the REST client, but also the real-time client that you can use for speaking to the thing instead of typing. And I've also done some things with Hugging Face for setting up pipelines for doing various things. So, for example, you could open up a Hugging Face pipeline for the task of sentiment analysis, and just having it set up a pipeline for you, and they have a standard interface for even specifying what local devices you have that might be useful for that computation, like a GPU that you could use through the web GPU API. But yeah, so far all of my experiments have just been with network available AI APIs, mostly from OpenAI and from Anthropic. But yeah, the machine that I'm running all of this on is an Apple Silicon machine, which is fairly capable for in running some of the simpler models locally. Yeah, and I plan to experiment with that also.
Greg, what has your experience been in using the OpenAI models to generate Smalltalk code to perform a specific task?
That's been pretty positive. Yeah, that was the very first thing I did with ChatGPT, was just see how much training it had on any kind of Smalltalk stuff. And I found it was actually pretty extensive. If I gave it a system prompt up front saying, you know all about, Pharo Smalltalk or VisualWorks Smalltalk, whatever, I could even get that specific. And it would write code for me that used Smalltalk message interfaces that were familiar to me from particular versions of those Smalltalks. So my strong suspicion so far is that it already does know a lot about existing Smalltalks over time, going pretty far back. And so I've gotten it to write some pretty decent Smalltalk code for me, and also it's pretty. It knows a lot about the grammar of Smalltalk and what objects are. So it's very amenable to being tuned or post-trained. When it gets things slightly wrong, you can instruct it on the finer points of coding style or with various development patterns that are familiar to us over time, and it does useful things with that additional training.
Yeah, I would say my experience has been a bit different from that. And maybe the problem is that I'm trying to use it with Quiz Smalltalk, but I often start a query with, in Quiz Smalltalk, how do I something? And it never says, I don't know how to do that. It always claims to know and always gives me some code. And the code always looks good, but very often it's sending messages that don't exist.
Yes, I had the same experience because it hallucinates a lot when it comes to generating like selectors or even like the syntax. And it seems to be trained a lot on the new Smalltalk syntax, because when it generates a class by default, I mean, I'm talking about ChatGPT, but even DeepSeeker, if you run it locally, it generates like the output of the new Smalltalk and not of Bass, Pharo, or anything else that could be available online. So yes, I had.
Oh, that's interesting. Yeah. I must admit, since I've been doing these initial experiments, I've mostly been, prompting it to write code as if it were Squeak Smalltalk, and it seems to know a lot about that. So yeah, maybe some of that, but not enough, carries over into other open Smalltalk implementations.
Just a comment. I've used Perplexity most for asking about syntax and code and things, and I found it pretty good. I've used it mostly for Pharo, also Gemstone, some Vast. With Pharo, it's very good. With Gemstone, pretty good as well. Vast, maybe less so.
Yeah, and also I would say keep checking, because every time these models are updated, they seem to know a lot more about pretty much everything they knew anything about before. And like I say, again, when I do encounter something that it gets wrong, I sort of accrete more stuff onto my system prompt that the user doesn't see when starting a conversation. My system prompt for a Smalltalk debugger, for example, has quite a bit of stuff in there that has sort of grown over time as I'm correcting it about things that got wrong before. And I mean, that's been pretty effective. It's kind of annoying to have to build up something like that rather than just having it in the training data. But the fact that it can be taught after its primary training has been pretty useful. And I think also as all of these models get better at deduction and breaking tasks down into subtasks, I think that ability will become even more effective.
Just as a specific
yeah.
example, I just asked Perplexity, I said, in Quiz Smalltalk, how can I create a morph that allows a user to enter a single line of text? And it thought for a while, and then it gave me some code. And one of the lines of code creates an instance of the class TextLineMorph. That doesn't exist in Quiz Smalltalk. Is that a class in Squeak? TextLineMorph?
Oh, I doubt it, but
Yeah.
no, let's see.
So the hallucinating comment, I think, is pretty accurate.
Yeah. Oh, huh. Of course, I can't answer that at the moment. In that way. Nope.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. It's not to say I haven't encountered hallucinations. I've encountered a bunch of them.
Sure.
But that sort of is a nice, although a little bit premature segue into tools. And maybe I'll just jump forward to that and talk a little bit about that. Most of the AI APIs also have a notion of a tool function, a function that you have locally that it can infer that it should invoke, but you run it locally and tell it the answer, and then it presents the answer as if it had computed it itself. And for that particular issue you mentioned of it hallucinating a class, I was able to cut that down almost to nothing by giving it a system prompt at the beginning saying, never refer to any class that you aren't positive, that you aren't sure exists. And if you ever want to know what classes there are, ask me, and here's this tool function for doing it. So later on, it would infer, I'm not exactly sure that this class exists. Hey, Craig, what classes are in your system? And I will tell it. And that also happens all out of band. It's not part of a conversation that a user would see. And so that, when I, got to the part of the API that talked about tool functions, I realized, oh, okay, there's something here. This could be, really, really useful, because yeah, you can't expect to get hallucination-free, useful stuff completely from what a large language model was trained with and what it gleans from you in a short conversation. But if you can get it to infer that it should make you do some work to better inform its answers, then that makes the whole thing much more powerful. And also, yeah, less prone to hallucination, and you have more control over it because it's taking behavior you write in your system into account before giving any answers that it's not sure about. And so this is also a nice point to talk about some of the content on my blog here. The most recent article is about something I wrote as soon as I realized that there was this tool function capability in the AI API. And that was making a voice-controlled version of a digital audio workstation, a tool that composers use to write and produce music. I use it a lot in my recording studio, and I'm usually, playing an instrument with my hands while I'm trying to use this audio workstation at the same time. So I thought it would be really useful to have a large language model do most of the manipulation of the workstation. Well, I'll call it a DAW, digital audio workstation. Have an AI language model do most of the manipulation of the DAW for me, so I can keep my hands on my instrument most of the time, so I can play musical ideas into the DAW. And that's possible because I can basically communicate the entire API of the DAW to the large language model at the beginning of a session. And if I give it a command about something it should do with the DAW, like, move the record head back to the beginning of a piece, it can infer from that instruction, oh, I need to make that happen, I need to run all of these tool functions that Craig told me about, out of band at the beginning of this conversation. And so, a huge side effect of me saying that to the LLM is that it runs a bunch of tool functions that I told it about, which actually make that thing happen in the DAW. And yeah, so while there was a bunch of training information about the particular DAW I'm using, Ableton Live, in the language models, training data, it doesn't know the Ableton Live API in nearly enough detail to do anything useful, but I have told it about the Ableton Live API in setting up the conversation. So yeah, it's turned out to be a great way of getting a language model to ingest very quickly the API of some other useful piece of software that you want to integrate into an AI app that you're writing. And so now basically I have sort of the equivalent of a second engineer in a recording studio, or a studio intern who I can just say things to, and they'll go off and do, usually simple, repetitive things that normally would have made me take my hands off my instrument and mouse around on the screen to do stuff. So anyway, yeah, once I did this voice-controlled Ableton Live experiment, that's what convinced me that, okay, there are a lot of really useful and positive things we could do with the AI. So it's not only worth being, literate about how they work and what you can do with them, but I decided, yeah, I actually want to build things with it. So yeah, despite all of the sort of empty hype that's also out there and all of the negative things that people are doing with AI, now I've come to the point where, I'm really convinced that it truly is a mixed bag, and there is a lot of good to be found in here.
Programming.
Sorry?
It's pair programming with the AI.
What programming?
Pair programming.
Yeah, exactly. And this sort of gets back to the idea I'm trying to pursue of, how can we use AI to enhance and develop collaboration, even in places where we thought it wasn't possible before. Oh, and there were a couple other websites I wanted to pass over before I even got to any of the demos that I don't want to forget to mention. So Wikipedia has several interesting articles along these lines of using technology to augment human capability, both individually and collectively. It's popularly becoming known as intelligence amplification or intelligence augmentation, which is sort of a cute reverse acronym of AI. It's IA instead. And my favorite practitioner of these ideas over time has been Doug Engelbart. I had the extreme privilege of working with him directly on a team that was recreating his NLS system for the web as a web app. We made a system called Hyperscope, and he has been the biggest inspiration for me to pursue these sorts of ideas. And I really recommend reading his 1962 SRI report on augmenting human intellect. You can find it at dougengelbart.org. A lot of prescient ideas in here along these lines, and even in places mentioning artificial intelligence, although it was at a much different stage, obviously, in 1962. Yeah, and then while we're on the concept of tool functions, Anthropic has come out with a, oh, sorry, is my Zoom window here obscuring this web page? Or does Zoom hide it?
No, I think it's okay.
It's okay.
Yeah, okay. But do you see it? I'm just curious.
No, we just see your
We're-
mouse and an article. We see the introducing the model.
Oh, okay, great. So you don't see this Zoom window that I see on top of it. Okay, good. Yeah, so Anthropic has introduced this further sort of API standard for separating the system which is providing the tool functions from the system which is providing the application logic. It's called the Model Context Protocol, or MCP. And it seems to me also that a lot of language model API providers are coalescing around this. And I expect, in particular, OpenAI to adopt this as well. So I sort of see a convergence around the basic message interface of the OpenAI API and MCP being used together. And yeah, I'm really expecting the other providers like Google with Gemini to converge on these two things. So those are what's checking out. So going back to this demo, I guess maybe the last thing I'll mention just for time about this sort of baby framework that I'm debugging into existence is that the goal here is to come up with a completion, which is that answer you saw before, where it's at 3 + 4 = 7. And the model for this compilation, this user interface component, in this case the workspace, holds on to the last completion that it got. And if it has one, it's not going to start a new conversation. It's going to just add what you've said next to the conversation and get the completion to answer the next completion. But if there is no completion, it's going to start a whole new conversation and add the thing that normally would have just been selected as a result of doing do it or print it or inspect it, and use that as the next user, as the first user message to a new language model conversation. So yeah, now let's get rid of this alt I put in.
So now I'm keen to see the implication of that, how that kind of works in practice. Yeah.
Yeah, so just for time, I'm not going to really look at much more code. I'm just going to be doing demos and talking about ideas. Go back to that one.
Greg, may I ask a question? I need to leave in 10 minutes, so I would like to ask one question before I leave, if possible.
Sure.
No, we were talking a couple of minutes ago about hallucination and how hard it was sometimes for the answer to be accurate in Smalltalk. And my main question is, do you think that we are, as Smalltalk developers, in a disadvantage compared to other languages because of the different dialects? Like, for example, if you ask something for Java or C, uh, there are not multiple Javas. There is just one Java or one C or whatever other languages. In Smalltalk, we have all these differences in the dialects, where we have very basic differences in things like sockets, file libraries, HTTP libraries, etc., etc., etc. So I feel that sometimes that is kind of special in the Smalltalk world and makes the LLM more complicated. But that's just my assumption. I don't know if you guys think the same or if it's something related or not.
Well, again, yeah, in a mainstream chatbot situation, like if you just go to ChatGPT and ask it a question point blank, about something, about a particular Smalltalk implementation's message interface or something, then yeah, it's much more likely to get it wrong, and you can't help it out with tools behind the scenes. So in that situation, yeah, I think languages that aren't as well represented in the training data are at a disadvantage there. But as soon as you get to a situation like this, where you're trying to integrate it into a live system that can answer those sorts of questions on the fly, even after you've changed the system in some way, like you've put the system into a state that has only existed now for 5 minutes, you can still get the language model to say useful things about it and take useful actions based on brand new changes. So in that situation, I would say we're not at a disadvantage, specifically because of this tool function capability that lets us collaborate live with the language model. So in effect, we are dynamically adding to what it knows. We don't have to rely on what it was trained with up front.
Okay, thank you, Greg.
Yeah. Oh, and I guess before you go, I could just sort of run through what I'm going to talk about. I have another example, just using a couple more complex tools that you can type text into, an inspector and a debugger.
You tease you.
So yeah, I'll get to that in a few minutes. But yeah, thanks for coming. But before I move on from the workspace, I just want to show that now that this workspace has a completion on its hands, I can say something like, and then add 5. And since it's already got a completion there, it knows what happened before. I can add 5 to that and continue on. So this is just a sort of a minimal example of context that I built up by using this tool being useful for coming up with a more elaborate tool. So now I'll look at an inspector. So in this inspector, most of these text panes are ultimately instances of subclasses of string holders. So we can do the same kinds of stuff here as well. And now we have even more context. In this workspace, we were sort of starting from a context-free position as far as the conversation with the language model goes. It didn't really know anything about what we were going to talk about before we said this first thing. But now, simply by opening this tool, this inspector on the point 3 at 4, we have some context. We're looking at an object 3 at 4. So we can, say things like, what am I? Oops. Oh, here's that one I put in earlier. Take it out. So when I opened this inspector, it was ready to give a system prompt to any language models I might speak with, saying, right away, you're talking to a point with these coordinates. So the language model knows that before I even say the first in-band thing to it. What am I? And by selecting a field in this point, that's, again, more context. And yeah, please pardon the shout coloring. Obviously it's for Smalltalk code, not for English, so it looks kind of weird. But yeah, now that I've selected X in this point, it knows that now the other participant in the conversation is the number 3. And so, behind the scenes, what I did is, when you select a field here, in addition to informing the UI that it should, update visually, it also changes the tool object on this side of the conversation that the language model is, to which the language model is speaking. So again, hardly any more complex than the workspace example, but I think very provocative. Once we've done that, then we can move on to what interesting things could a debugger tell a language model up front in a system prompt. So I'll just halt here. And then, yeah, pardon me just blowing away this code and typing English into it. You could say things like that. And that's because, this debugger in a system prompt up front, told the language model, a bit about who it's talking to. And I found here, I didn't have to say all that much. I could pretty much just say, I'm a Smalltalk debugger. And the training data in this particular OpenAI model, which I think is 4.0, which actually knows even more about Smalltalk than 4 mini and 3.5. I could just say that, and it knows, that a debugger has a context stack. And this debugger also exposed tool functions to the AI that lets the language model say, hey, tell me what the 4th thing in your context stack is. So it was actually a local tool function that told it this answer. The language model is just repeating it back to me. Sorry?
Can you show some of, just like quick snippet of the implementation of that tool function? Is that using the MCP thing?
No, yeah, I wanted to mention MCP here, but I'm not using it here because there is no separation between the system where the application logic is and where the tool functions are. It's the same system. It's just this quick image. But if I were to put the tool functions that the language model can call on a different machine entirely, then yeah, I'd be using MCP to facilitate that. Does that make sense? Yeah. So yeah, we can look at a bit about oh, also excuse that there are no class categories here. I'm also working on a large project for doing source code management, and the system is in a bit of a mess at the moment. So everything's just in one big list. But we can look at the system prompt. And just this sentence, I find, went a long way. And I told it, you know, what the opening context stack was and what the selected index is, things like that. And then, oh, sorry, this is an older version. It's only got one tool and it's a trivial one that has nothing to do with debugging. I apologize. I'll have to change that for the next version of this talk. But it does give an example of a tool, even though it's a trivial one. The OpenAI API, and pretty much most of the other ones now too, in setting up the conversation, they give you an opportunity to answer a description of all the functions a language model could ask you to call. And this is basically a nested array which will get turned into JSON when it actually goes over the wire and goes to the language model's API. So yeah, this one is just really trivial. It's just, I just wanted to have some sort of unique name. And it has an English description that it can use in trying to infer that it should call it. So if I said later in a conversation, what is this svich of 7? It would know, because it has this description, oh, now I need to call this function. And you have to tell it a bit about what parameters it should use when asking you to run that function. So these two descriptions here are pivotal in getting the language model to deduce that, oh, now's the time to call this function. So the function has a return type, parameters, and also a queue as to which of those parameters are absolutely required. So yeah, I apologize that there's not a more meaningful example of a tool here. But hopefully the next version of the talk will have that. But to just do this, it didn't even need a tool. It knew enough from its existing knowledge about Smalltalk and Smalltalk debuggers and the information I gave it about my context stack to do this. It knows that there is a context stack. It knows what a context stack is. It knows that the context stack is indexable. It knows when I said fourth, I was talking about the fourth index into that stack. So yeah, I apologize. It didn't ask me to calculate this. It was able to answer this just from the information I told it up front about what the contexts were when I opened this debugger. But as we've seen from other projects in Smalltalk and in several dialects to this point, you can pass around a lot of things which are almost like Smalltalk objects in JSON. I haven't really had a need to do much of that yet, but I think the possibility is there. And that's just because most of the actual work that I see happening is going to be done locally in tool functions, and the LLM will just be invoking them. So sorry, that was a bit long-winded. But I just wanted to ask one more follow-up question. Huh, that's funny. This is actually a different answer than I got earlier today. Earlier today, I did the same thing, and it said this. So that's interesting. What it said this second time was not wrong, but it's not as useful as this thing that I got earlier today. So that's interesting. I've also noticed with OpenAI that when you're just using the ChatGPT chatbot user interface, every once in a while, it will give you two answers and ask you which one is better, as they try to improve the way in which you interact with GPT. So that's a provocative thing. That's something that I want to explore more. But anyway, my point in doing this is just that I didn't tell it anything about receivers. It already knows, the basic object model and grammar of Smalltalk. So I can say things like this without having to teach it anything new. And, obviously I'm using the word know very loosely. It doesn't actually know anything. What I mean is I can get the transformer which underlies the language model to traverse its data in such a way that it will hit the most meaningful bits of its training data and come up with a meaningful completion.
That's a good distinction, isn't it, actually?
Yeah. But that's an interesting point. I do think it's possible that we will reach the so-called AGI phase of AI. I actually think, is a human being a machine is a quite deep question. It does not have a trivial answer. I happen to think that humans are machines. You really zoom out and really take that definition very strictly. And if that is so, then I think it is possible to make very similar machines in other ways. So I do think we're going to get there. I don't think it's going to be as fast as most of the hype is leading us to believe. But I do think it's possible. So I do think eventually we'll be able to say, the word know, knowing things, and mean it exactly as much as we mean it with a human being. And yeah, obviously that is a very controversial stance at this point in time.
I think we've all been secretly thinking it in the background ourselves as you question yourself and how you think. It's, yeah, where do you stop? It's in, who knows? We'll find out.
Yeah. Yep. I hope later rather than sooner, but yeah, I think we will. So yeah, my 3 little demos lined up here. There was some other things I wanted to just mention, though they don't really correspond to demos. But I guess it's just been in the last 6 weeks. It's kind of amazing to me, given how far it spread. But there's this meme going around now from one of the co-founders of OpenAI on social media of vibe coding, which is people who have little or no experience with programming just describing what some software that they want and getting a language model to make it, to create it. And through a different kind of trial and error than we're used to in live coding, getting to a usable system. I think at the current moment, the way most people are vibe coding, so to speak, is on the whole pretty dangerous, in that it leads to things that they don't understand and can't maintain and can't fix. But I think there is some pretty strong resonance between vibe coding and live coding, at least as I've been doing it for a long time. I think so. Yeah. Anyway, I highly recommend reading this Wikipedia article also, because it's got a bunch of really interesting references from the last 6 weeks. Some pretty decent writing about this concept, especially from Kevin Roos of the New York Times. But anyway, I think this could be a more substantial thing if the kind of collaboration I'm talking about with IDEs is brought to bear here, instead of just expecting a language model to take your English description and come back with something that does exactly what you want and will do exactly what you want for all time, even as your requirements change. I think that's a futile endeavor. But I think if we had the sorts of collaborations that I'm starting to build here, instead of just a really simple chatbot interface, that vibe coding could turn into like a really meaningful thing, and something that really has continuity with live coding in the traditional sense. So that's the thing. And then I'm kind of done with the slides here. There are also other groups who are trying to leverage very familiar user interface elements into things that invoke AI in a meaningful way. And one that has just been interesting to me, this isn't meant to be an advertisement, but there's a group called the Browser Company, which earlier made a browser called Arc, which tried to deal with tab management in a new way. And now another one called Dia that is trying to make simple but powerful integrations of AI into user interface elements. For example, giving new behavior to the text insertion cursor itself, this little vertical bar that you see everywhere. They have a prototype where you can click on that vertical line and get a menu of interesting things that AI could help you with. Yeah, so there's a bunch of interesting things that other people are doing along these lines as well. And then I just wanted to also mention again that all the stuff I'm doing, along with the WebAssembly work I presented last time I was here speaking, and the epigram compiler stuff I'm doing, is all part of this larger project called Caffeine, which is at caffeine.js.org. And that's built on Squeak.js that I mentioned earlier, that Vanessa Freudenberg did. And yeah, just to put in another plug for that, because it's a really interesting way of exploring doing web apps with Squeak or Pharo or Kuis or any open Smalltalk VM in a way that's totally integrated with the JavaScript and now polyglot environment that's around you in a web browser. I think WebAssembly is still on track to make all languages equal peers in a web app environment, in a web environment. Yeah, and then I already talked about Impress.js. So thank you. Any more questions? Like maybe from the chat?
Hi, Craig. It's Peter here. I saw your last presentation where you had AI generate Smalltalk code. Do you have an example of that?
Oh, that wasn't me. That was either, sorry, Tim, help me out.
Are we talking about the
Two
glue?
there have been two other AI talks here in UK, Doug, right?
What were they?
I'm blanking on their names, but yeah, that wasn't me, but I am doing that. Sorry, can you say the question
It's-
again? Because I probably have an answer.
I didn't see it, but it may possibly have been somebody from Fink, because I know they talking to LLMs back and forth from
Yeah. The
Glamorous Toolkit.
Glamorous Toolkit, yeah, presentation, yeah.
Mm.
Yeah, I thought that was a very interesting way of integrating Smalltalk code. And actually, if we look at this response I wasn't expecting, there was some Smalltalk code there. So this is very crude, but I have sort of a master prompt that I tack on to the beginning of any other prompts that any other Smalltalk tools give that says, if you're going to generate Smalltalk code, precede it with this token so that I can notice it when it comes across. And yeah, so here's an example of Smalltalk code being generated. And I'm sorry, once again, can you say, was there more to your question?
Not really. I just was wondering if, vibe coding, you're talking about doing a AI prompt where you're telling it the app to write, and that's maybe a little bit far reaching, but I wonder if there's a more simple example that you had at hand.
Yeah, well, this unexpected one, I think, is an interesting one. It's sort of vibe coding of its own accord here. I didn't ask it to write any code, but here it is doing it anyway. And instead of, obviously writing a whole application, it's just making a tiny little bit of code to solve a very small localized need. But I could just as well have said, instead of this question, I could have given it an imperative. I could have said, write me some code that does blah, blah, blah. And that can be at any scale, from some tiny little do it that I want just as a utility to an entire application. Although I think to write an entire application, that would require me to have supplied a bunch of tools functions for it to use. I should also mention you can specify more tools functions at any time. They don't have to all be specified up front before the conversation starts.
So, Craig, your image has a lot of this, pre-statements for the AI prompt. On the fly here right now, are you able to tell it to maybe write a simple method or function, and will it do that on the fly, or do you still have to train your image a little more to provide the proper prompts?
I don't think so. What did you have in mind?
I don't know, maybe something simple with a dictionary and outputting to transcript, something simplistic.
Okay.
I mean, I guess if you said a dictionary of all months or something, it would probably then, yeah, that would test it a bit, wouldn't it?
Oh, that's a shorter one, yeah.
All months and their days or something.
Yeah, then I don't even have to tell it what keys to use. Let's see what if it comes up with something intelligent on its own.
Yeah. And while that works, you were talking about how this vibe coding or AI assisted thing relates to the live coding. I've been thinking about this similar lines lately. It's like we, as Smalltalkers, always took pride in having a reflective system that we can query. And now we have a tool that can query itself to some degree, because if you expose functions that can be executed by this self-running agent that you can query, then it can basically be reflective at a different level. I don't know if that's too abstract, but
Look at that.
Yeah. So that's pretty much the right thing, or what I expected
Hmm.
at that moment.
Mhm.
are you querying just the regular OpenAI API, or did you create anything special like embeddings locally, or just like you're just querying
No, that's
the
just
public model without
I took
anything else?
this debugger in its system prompt told it a little bit about the state of itself, like what contexts were in the stack when it opened, but it didn't say anything about this task.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Craig, do you think there'd be value in writing a wrapper in your environment that represents the AI, and then being able to just talk to that from Smalltalk without using API code as such? In other words, just regular Smalltalk messages to the wrapper that would then talk to whichever underlying LLM.
Oh yeah, there is that thing. That's what these tools, the debugger, the inspector, and the workspace are talking to behind the scenes. But you can talk to them in any other code that you want to write.
Okay, because that would also insulate the individual tools or UIs from which LLM you're talking to. You could swap that out then at different stages. And so
Oh yeah, for sure. There's a bunch of fine-grained framework sort of elements that we'd want to factor correctly here. These are just very brute experiments here.
yeah.
So yeah, this debugger is holding on to the last completion,
Mhm.
and that completion has an OpenAI REST client,
Right.
and you could just talk to that as much as you want and do something else. Doesn't even have anything to do with anything visual.
Mhm. Right. Hmm.
Yeah. Yeah, and then, well, while I'm here, I noticed that there's a bunch of metadata that is also useful. Like, what is the budget that I'm burning through of tokens here? How much is this API use costing me? Stuff like that.
You're building up code here in the browser in the VM image environment. What do you do about preserving that code from session to session? Where do you store that?
Storing the completions? I didn't quite
No,
catch
no,
that.
your code, the code that you're writing to implement your prototype, yeah.
Oh, I'm just using the normal Smalltalk source code management stuff, although I am writing an alternative to that.
Okay.
But that's a really long-term project.
You're using Monticello and stuff like that?
Yeah, for now.
Okay.
But
All right.
I can also plug this other thing called Naiad. If you go to my blog /Naiad, you can read about it. And that's, yeah, the idea behind Naiad is that everything is done with live objects. There are no changes files. All your source code and any other objects you create as a side effect of running your code are all stored in what is basically an object database that you communicate with via remote messaging. And I imagine at some point you'd want to use Gemstone or something like that to actually implement it. But I have a simpler prototype that just uses a normal Smalltalk image that can do remote messaging as an object database. It just you snapshot it. You want to persist it.
That's just remote for persistence.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I'm curious, general question to anybody. Gemstone's a pretty heavy duty database. Is there a good lightweight object database for Pharo?
I would think you could adapt Magma to Pharo without too much trouble, but I don't think anyone's done it yet.
I used to use Omnibase, but it's hasn't been maintained recently.
There's an alternative.
Yes.
Can you hear me? It's
There's
an
Soil
alternative
now.
called Soil.
Soil.
I can put the link into the chat. This is from the Cologne guys from Germany who built up this grid with Pharo, and they have written an alternative to the former open source, former object-oriented databases, and it's called Soil, and it's done by Norbert Hartl. I put the link into the chat.
Oh, cool.
I've looked at that. It's pretty nice, but it's Linux specific. It won't run on
Yes.
Windows, for example.
Yeah, will not work on Windows at the current stage because of some APIs they use. So is Windows a requirement for you, or?
My primary development is in Windows. I do use Linux, but I'd like to have something where if I save an image in Windows, I can transfer it to Linux or elsewhere and it'll operate. And with the Soil object database, that's just not a reality at this point. So I'll continue to use Omnibase maybe, but it's getting dated now.
Yeah, you can use Voyage and things like that with as a wrapper to things like Mongo. If your structures are not complex.
Yeah, I haven't looked at that one. I just like something that's got a simple API, so I can just send a save object or commit message, and it's done. And I think some of the other ones have a lot more prerequisites to make them work.
Yeah,
Voyage restore. Did you try restore? This is another one that is easy to use.
Not a relational mapper, but yes.
Yeah.
Now, are there free versions of Gemstone? I mean,
yes.
I had a commercial project years ago, and Gemstone was quite expensive. But is there a free version?
Yes, there is a free version, and you can do some quite big stuff with it already. But that's also Linux or Unix only. It's not going to run on Windows.
Right. Okay, thanks.
If you want a simple API, Voyage will probably do it for you. Voyage is available in the Pharo environment, and that gives you an API to either in-memory or to Mongo and to several other things. So that may be something to look at.
Okay, thanks.
Craig, is this the caffeine code available online?
Yeah, if you go to caffeine.js.org, this is just a GitHub pages website. And yeah, the repo is there.
Yeah, because it's funny. It's like everybody that is doing some experimentation with AI is implementing the OpenAI API themselves. So there are maybe like as many implementations as people is playing with these REST APIs. So maybe
Which
they
I think
should
is a good thing to do. It's a good way to really learn the
learn.
APIs to do
Yes,
that.
learn the abstraction.
Even though there's hardly any reuse happening, that will happen eventually.
Yes.
I think especially after MCP becomes part of all of the APIs.
Yes, I still have to dig into the MCP and how to implement something like that. But that would, yes, that would be great just to implement
Yeah.
something on the Smalltalk side also.
Yeah. I think there's going to be a huge market for MCP servers that act as front ends, well, that act as API wrappers for existing software, in some cases, really old software. We'll kind of bring them into the AI era.
Craig, got a question regarding caffeine. When you do a web app and you want to use caffeine, do you start the development entirely in on the web browser using caffeine for the VM, or do you maybe write the application model on Pharo on the desktop and then transfer the image over? Or what's the process? And the second question is, can I write the whole app in Smalltalk, or do I have to get into any JavaScript code?
No, you can write the whole app in Smalltalk. That was another sort of challenge I gave myself when Squeak.js came out. When I learned that it had a JavaScript bridge, bidirectional one, you really can make every JavaScript object that's living with you in that web browser look like a Smalltalk object, and provide Smalltalk objects that look to JavaScript frameworks as if they were JavaScript objects, including promises and callbacks and all sorts of exotic things. So yeah, I gave myself the challenge of loading Squeak.js in a web browser and never leaving it. And what can I do that way? And I've been able to do everything I've wanted to do so far, including like weird virtual reality apps, all sorts of stuff.
When you do that, what do you use for UI in terms of widgets and forms and menus and lists and all sorts of stuff?
Yeah, so after I made the first interesting thing with that bridge, I just sort of went on a tear, like what integrations with other, well-known JavaScript frameworks can I do? And yeah, so apart from, running other Smalltalk images in it, like Pharo and Kuis, I got into virtual reality with this JavaScript framework called A-Frame. These sort of zooming 3D slides that I was using with Impress, but then also, like mainstream web app front end frameworks like Vue.js and Observable. I didn't get so much into React, even though it's the most popular one, because the learning curve for that one is so steep that I just didn't think it made a very accessible example of a caffeine use case, because you have to get into all these details. I picked Vue.js sort of as my exemplar of a front-end web framework because it seemed to be the simplest to me. So it made for a more accessible example of using caffeine. But then I've done these integrations with all sorts of other frameworks like WebMidi, web workers, the web browser's dev tools, itself. And just a whole bunch of other ones.
I can see that Eric's on the call and he does Code Paradise. I guess his answer would be like web components. There's like so many nice web components.
Yeah, web components. I've done those too. Yeah, I think web components. I mean, it's sort of a lot of people are down on them because they haven't taken over the world fast enough. But I think they're slowly but surely really getting traction. I'm a big fan of them.
Yeah, and then you're not really into any of these kind of other frameworks, are you really?
Yeah, so like another one of my demos is getting rid of Smalltalk graphics entirely and using only native web graphics to do a traditional Smalltalk IDE. And that's using web components.
Yeah.
There's actually a blog post on this context about that. Actually, a whole bunch of interesting, well, to me, articles about projects I've been doing, and front-end web stuff features prominently on there too.
Shoelace is the big web components one that's quite nice. I know Eric uses that.
Yeah. But yeah, as little as I'm trying to keep to a minimum the amount of sort of supporting static web infrastructure that I have to do outside of Smalltalk to make a web app work. Sometimes I go to a text editor and hand edit CSS, but you don't have to do even that because CSS has a JavaScript API also. Yeah, as far as I know, you can do absolutely everything from within Smalltalk. And it looks like Smalltalk, even though the message interface might be a little weird because it's, you know, written with a JavaScript sort of mindset. And things might get even weirder once other languages come into the web browser, WebAssembly.
If you do a web UI only, then you still run in Squeak.js inside of the HTML page itself. And then you have to have the web UI and Squeak UI for the development in the same browser, in the same tab. And this is disturbing because there are other approaches like with Paradise or Faro.js where you have, let's say, your Smalltalk image outside browser and you do the coding there and then fully work on the web part.
Oh yeah, that's also an option. Like I've done sort of split system development, but it's still all live. That's the thing that's important to me is that it's all live coding.
Yeah.
There's no like generation of static assets which later become reified. Everything is reified all the time. It's never static. But yeah, what I was saying before is that I've done a Smalltalk, a Squeak UI, which doesn't use Bitblit at all. It's using it's entirely made up of built-in web browser components or web components that you can make on the fly. Those don't have to pre-exist either. You never see, and in that interface, you never see, you know, a trace of any of this stuff. You don't see Bitblit at all. It's all Canvas graphics or built-in widgetry from the web browser.
I mean, what would be cool is if you would, let's say, have a simple web page that you open, go into the Chrome DevTools, have your Smalltalk there in a separate, let's say, window that you can detach, and then code Smalltalk and have the application built in the normal browser.
Yeah, you can do that. I've done that as well. I mean, from my work with Naiad, that sort of has remote messaging as an absolute requirement. And yeah, I think being able to control one web page from another, one page has Squeak running in it, and the other one is just like this empty canvas, so to speak, that the Squeak web page can, you know, inject HTML elements into. I think that's a interesting way to go as well. Then not only do you not have the Squeak UI in that web app that you're building, but you don't have any Squeak objects at all in there. That's also possible. And that, yeah, I should say that's enabled quite a bit by the DevTools support that I've done for Caffeine as well. You know, I mentioned this before in this group, but not for a couple of years now. If you look at the Caffeine repo, you can see that there's a Chrome web browser extension. I haven't tried this in a while, so it might not work, but let me just see. You can, you know, have a tab in your web browser DevTools that runs yet another Squeak there. And this thing has total control over every web page that this browser is running. It can do anything the DevTools can do.
Mhm.
So it controls the screen in the other frame. So it controls.
Yeah.
Okay.
These two windows are opened by the same instance of Chrome. So yes.
Yeah. Okay. That's what I meant. That's cool.
Yeah.
Because then the only thing you need is the browser, and you can start developing.
Yeah, exactly. And it's all live all the time.
Yeah. Did you do some experiments with, for instance, binding some libraries for instance, for speech to text or other? Because basically you could say, okay, you mentioned that you when you play your instrument, you don't have the hands free, and so basically that you can do Smalltalk programming just by talking to your image, saying, hey, please open the browser, create me the class foo, implement the method like that, and then use the ChatGPT to do it.
Yeah, exactly. That would be very similar to this voice-controlled DAW. It would just be different tools functions that made it happen.
Yeah.
Well, what you describe with the tools thing is very similar to the session that we had on glue data. I think that sort of perhaps predates this MCP thing, but I think Mariana was thinking along the same sort of lines about having tools that you could, you know, that the LLM was interacting with to do the right thing, and you know, you were presenting different kinds of tools and it was picking the right one to do the right sort of functionality. So I remember being quite struck by that back in October. So things have obviously moved on quite a bit now, and you know, it seems like that is becoming an interesting technique.
Yeah, it's just a systematic way of doing remote procedure calls. Yeah. And enabling their discovery.
Hi, great. May I ask you something?
Yeah.
You know, something I've been thinking about with AI and, you know, teaching Smalltalk at the university is that if we could use AI to help students to realize that what they are doing is already done in another part of the image. For example, it's very common for newies to do a do with an if true. You know, it would be great to, you know, have the AI tell them, hey, you know what, you can do select. It's the same thing. Do you think that's possible? You know, or how hard would it be with, you know, the things that you've done?
I think that is possible. I mean, I was always very impressed with the behavior that Ted Kaler was able to get in the selector browser just by, you know, well, this typing in receiver arguments in an answer and getting the system to, you know, figure out what might achieve that. I mean, this was very brute force, but I think with AI, you know, wow, we could do a much more sophisticated version of this. And I think that would come to bear on the use case you just mentioned.
Yeah, I think that would be
quite strongly and in a straightforward way. Sorry.
Yeah. Great, thanks.
Yeah.
On the assembly stuff that you were doing?
Sorry?
Any update on the WebAssembly stuff that you mentioned that you were doing? Anything
new? I've gotten a bit further in the converting or subsuming the entire virtual machine into WebAssembly, but I'm not there yet. That project has kind of been on the back burner for the last 9 months, I guess. just realized, I should be literate in AI programming, so shifted my focus there. But it's still, I think it's still on a good path.
What I found nice is, for instance, when you do seaside work, then typically it's very cumbersome to write a lot of Smalltalk code, say just mapping to HTML stuff and so on. But the nice thing is, for instance, in ChatGPT, you can put in a snippet of HTML and then ask it to convert it into seaside. So basically, when you have a snippet of HTML, it can quickly convert. It's the same for instance, you have an XML, you can ask the AI to convert it into a different format, like JSON or other. So it's very helpful in conversion also. So that's why possibly maybe there you can use it to ask, for instance, the AI, hey, can you convert this? For instance, my Smalltalk method into an optimized bytecode or other experiments like that.
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah. Yep. Yeah, we've only scratched the surface of what will be possible here. Yeah. Oh, and with regard to WebAssembly, I think an interesting place to start in my blog reading about my work there is with this post on tactical speedups of just making, egregious hotspots faster without, doing the entire virtual machine. There are a lot of useful little things you can do that really speed things up.
Yeah.
And yeah, the first one I did was making BitBlit faster, and it really helped.
Yeah, cool. Thanks for the demo.
Sure.
Yeah, Craig, I've got to go, but thanks. That's been great. Nice to see you again.
Yeah, thank you.
Good to see you continuing on a lot of this stuff. And
Good to see you too.
I'll dig into some of this. So thank you very much. Take care. Cheers.
Cheers.
It's always inspiring, isn't it? So, what are you thinking of looking at next, Craig? What's on this front? Is it just more tools and just as you need things, you're adding a tool or writing the new pieces?
I think there's a lot more to do with the debugger. Just sort of like, what can I do anywhere I can write text? That was a powerful lever. And I think also, how could the debugger be more collaborative is also a really simple but powerful lever. And especially with the popularity of this vibe coding meme, I think there could be a very receptive audience for it as well. So I think there's a lot more to do with making the debugger smarter and helpful. Yeah, in fact, in the Smalltalk IDE, that might turn out to be the main way that AI has useful visibility.
If I recall what the glue guy, what was it, Mariano was saying, he was like, yes, you can type things in, but it gets a bit tedious, doesn't it, typing stuff in? And it was more about picking the right tool for you based on its understanding of what you were seeing. So, I could imagine a debugger where it's like, it would show you the right visualization because it understood what you were trying to do and understood that it was a better way to see something. So you didn't have to type in, show it to me as a map or something, or.
Yeah, and debugging is so provocative just in the developer's mind. Inherently, like, it makes you think of, okay, I'm writing this code. Has someone else already written this? And it leads you to wonder about what's in other code repositories. What are other developers up to? How could I collaborate with them? And language models could help facilitate a lot of these things. And yeah, probably the very next thing I'll do here is add the voice control to the debugger.
Yeah, that sounds good, doesn't it?
But yeah, my overarching interest in almost all of these little side projects is enhancing collaboration between people and ending language wars. I'm trying to bring about a collaborative polyglot future.
Yeah, that's a good goal. Actually, that's very good. It's just you kind of hope that we can do better than just like typing text in, because it does get a bit frustrating.
Oh yeah.
To express what you're trying to say, right? It's just you want it to read your mind, don't you? It's just like, just damn it, do what I'm thinking.
Yeah, and I mean, since the stuff I'm doing now runs in web browsers, like every time I go to like a mobile device or a tablet or something, I immediately start thinking about multimodal abilities that the AI should have. You know, it should be able to sketch things with the stylus, should be able to speak things, obviously. Yeah, a lot more than just typed text.
Certainly, I've found I've not coded using AIs to code with Smalltalk, but done a reasonable amount with some JavaScript and producing visualizations. And I found that after a while, initially when I was getting errors, exceptions, whatever, I'd sort of type them across, cut and paste them across. And after a while, I started just moving around the screen to represent, to show the console, to show the context where the error had occurred, taking a screenshot and passing the screenshot in and saying, basically, this is the problem I've got. And the AIs were just getting so much smarter. I could see it over the months that I was doing that, and interpreting the overall context of where I was, given where the chat had worked with, got up to. And then also using, I mean, others have got it now, but Claude AI having the project knowledge, so you could curate your own sort of RAG type context. And then also working with its preview ability, so that if I was working in JavaScript, I'd often start by producing single page apps that it could run immediately in its preview, and then I could try them out there. So and I found myself getting lazy after a while, because when I'd run out of prompts for a while, I couldn't bring myself to go and back and work the old-fashioned way. I'd wait until my till I had some more prompts available. I did put a question in the chat. I wasn't really quite sure how to phrase it, but while I was listening to your presentation, which was really interesting, I thought, well, I'll try using Claude with its preview to try and get it to produce a Squeak.js single page app and run it in its preview. I didn't get very far with that, and so I switched to Morphic.js, and it's produced a Morphic.js perfectly well, and I can.
Oh yeah, nice.
Yeah.
And Snap.
Yeah.
Yeah. I love that one. Yeah.
Yeah. So that's obviously going straight to JavaScript. It's not producing Smalltalk and then having that translated behind the scenes into JavaScript. But I do wonder whether that's also possible.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, yeah, before I did any integrations with mainstream or really popular mainstream front-end JS frameworks like Vue, I did an integration with Morphic.js with Yen's help. And yeah, just interacting with that from the Smalltalk side of the JS bridge, I got the sense that, well, I have the sense now after working with AI for a bit, that yeah, that is very doable. Not sure what specifics I could give to make that more compelling opinion, but yeah, that's my sense of it.
Yeah, thanks. It did occur to me that there might be some incentive for Smalltalk vendors to commission specific training on their own dialects and their base libraries. and then integrate that?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I would love to see a cross-dialect Smalltalk effort to produce MCP servers which aid like getting your bearings in a Smalltalk dialect you've never seen before very quickly.
Hmm.
I think that would be a really useful project.
And I wondered whether there would be any possibility of connecting in with the refactoring browser to sort of augment that with AI.
Oh yeah, yeah, for sure.
That's
Mhm. Yeah, that's a very good point.
Yeah, there's a lot of possibilities that suddenly begin to spring to mind.
Hmm.
Yeah, and also with the compiler and with instruction optimization, like was mentioned earlier. Yeah, refactoring at several levels.
There's something in Smalltalk where you say that is limiting for usage of AI. For instance, would there be a more AI-friendly Smalltalk, which would be different from the current existing ones? There's something that a Smalltalk would need to have better or improve so that it's more AI-friendly from the tools or from the language.
Oh, well, I guess one of my main points of this talk today is that simply by being dynamic, that is AI friendliness because you're able to gather and do things with meaningful, fresh context that is very useful for the AI that you've integrated. So I think that in itself is AI friendliness. But really, any system that can use tool functions effectively is AI friendly.
I think the benefit in Smalltalk is that you can do it at any point in time because you are a lively thing. Because
Yeah,
most of the
yeah.
things that I see in JavaScript today, there are nice web pages where you can put your prompt in and then you it generates you the TypeScript or the CSS or whatever and makes you a nice app that you can preview like in Claude. But it's not while the application is running. The nice thing is that in Smalltalk, you can use the AI while the application is running. So you can change on the fly the application while it is running and adopt it to the new needs. And I think this is the most benefit.
Yeah, you can
Still,
get it to infer. You can get it to
Yeah.
infer things about code you just wrote. It didn't exist even 10 minutes ago, much less when the model was trained.
Yeah.
Yeah.
This might be related, but slightly different in that when I was asking Claude to produce that basic Morphic JS app, it was producing different iterations and trying them out. And I could see that happening in the preview, and you could see the version count going up. So I think it was running them, seeing what was happening, seeing if there was what it was expecting. And you could actually see it was going into edit mode. And then it finally rested, it sort of stopped at a point where it thought it had achieved what I'd asked for in the prompt. And to me, that's something, a couple of months ago, it didn't do that, as far as I could see. So that the rate of change is pretty impressive.
Yeah, and if it could do that on its own, I mean, just imagine what it could do if it were really interactively collaborating with you on the debugging part. I
Yeah.
think that would be amazing. I mean, people are already writing snarky posts on Reddit about how horrible vibe debugging is, but I think vibe debugging could be wonderful.
I think the Smalltalk should need to be nonetheless be constructed more different. For instance, Faro at the moment has possibility that you ask the class for its environment. In any normal Smalltalk, you have just one environment. You have the Smalltalk dictionary, and then you have all your classes inside, and that's it. But in Faro, for instance, in the new version, you can create another environment, compile your classes into this environment, totally independent from the environment that you're in. So basically, you have what Squeak back then had as image segments. You can have an image inside of an image. So let's say I think of a possibly Smalltalk where you have an AI inside and you are running inside of your Smalltalk, and then do the same as in Claude. You ask it, hey, do that, experiment, you try out, but it does that in a kind of sandbox. Then it shows you the new version, and when you are satisfied, you hop over to the new version and work on that one. If it's a failed, let's say, result, you throw it away as a full image or as a full code and code space, lively code space. This would be something I think totally different from the current Smalltalk experience. If you this could be combined, Smalltalk and AI together.
I mean, this reminds me of how, Alan Kay was keen to say whenever he could that Smalltalk is a system for coming up with what is next after Smalltalk. And I think AI integration could really accelerate that in new ways like what you're talking about. And even weirder things that we can't even imagine without actually getting our hands dirty and interacting.
To overcome the dialect variants that we have. For instance, say, okay, here I have code in Squeak. Please port it over to another language dialect. I think it can transform at the moment a lot of things. I think maybe that's also something that might be helpful to explore.
Yeah,
the problem is always time. I mean, there are so many possibilities now with these.
And I think that one, would be a very satisfying thing to automate.
Yeah.
Yeah, so things in my experience, even if it might take 10 shots to get one hit in a prompt, the cognitive load of doing that is much less than I would have experienced if I'd approached the issue traditionally. And having access to multiple AIs with their different approaches, and then within each vendor, the choice of whether it's deep thinking or whatever, that you can try out various different things, especially if you've thought out up front how you're going to verify, how you're going to test that what you've got works. And so I guess that's sort of where some of the augmentation comes from, or the other aspect would be that I would find that when I don't code full time now, but when I was coding full time, if I was coming into a particularly deep problem, it was occupy so much of my mental capacity that when I got to the end of the day and I tried to switch off, and then I had to go and reload all that information the next day, there was a real loss. And people talk about the context switching and overheads and stuff like that when you're shifting between problems and all that sort of stuff. Quite a lot of that was improved by handing off the memory and the context information in the way that I used AIs, especially if I was incrementally curating the knowledge base that I was using in the AI, like Claude Project Knowledge or something like that. So I could capture sort of incremental points, or even if my understanding of the problem was changing over time, I could use the AI to help me capture my latest understanding of the nature of the problem to then feed back in again as part of the context of moving on incrementally and trying to make the next step in progress.
Yeah, that's so important because the requirements of a piece of software never remain static. They will change. And any knowledge you can bring to bear on the requirements of a thing or how it's implemented will make the AI so much more effective.